hey, how do I practice when I am frustrated? What skills can I use? And not necessarily put words to it because words are hard for kids. We have this steady stream of stories of families whose lives are for the better because they've been able to add Migher to it. And every time I hear one of those stories, I don't know, it still makes me excited. Kids are learning, and if you support that learning, they're gonna, you're giving your kids an advantage, a long-term advantage, because there is this vision. I mean, I very much try to keep it of like, hey, like, what is the best version of any single kid we've got in front of us? And how can we help that kid be the best version of themselves?
Hi there, my name is Kruti. I am the co-founder and CEO of HealthyGamer, where we are all things mental health and technology. I'm joined today by Dr. Jason Kahn, the Chief Science Officer and founder of Migher. Migher is an incredible platform for all things emotional regulation, especially for neurodivergence and those really difficult emotions sometimes kids face, and especially as it relates over into parental stress. So I'm really excited to dive in with him about all things emotional regulation to help myself and if you're watching, become better parents. All right, so my guest today is Dr. Jason Kahn, the Chief Science Officer and founder of Migher, a mental health platform all about emotional regulation for children and families ages 6 to 14. Is that right?
That's right.
Thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me here.
Yay! So you are a parent as well,
Yes.
and you still teach at Harvard Medical School,
I am an instructor at Harvard Medical School, yes.
and you're running a mental health company.
Doing my best, yes.
Yeah. What is it like for you as a parent and burnout?
I mean, there is a lot, to say the least. I mean, it is very, I mean, it's nice to have a lot of support. I mean, I think that, you as well can, like, we have a great family. I think have two great kids. And then also, like, I don't know, like, I very carefully carve out time to make sure that I'm part of, like, hanging out with my kids as much as possible. So, coach my daughter's soccer team. My son has moved well beyond me in his soccer ability, but get the long drives to and from practice.
That's awesome. I'm teaching my kids piano right now. It's always at the end of the day, and I teach our neighbors' kids as well. So that fourth kid, I always feel a little sorry for them. So how do you manage your stress?
Uh, I actually I wake up very early in the morning and I start pretty much every day by going for a run. Nice and dark, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
So me, the moon, the stars, and going for a run at 5 in the morning. And nice way to just sort of get started and try to calm myself down before anything wild starts happening.
Yeah. I'm not awake until like 10. The first couple hours I'm just like going through the motions, and then the coffee hits and then I can kind of find my space. Um well, what kind of keeps you motivated at My Dear?
I think one of the nice things that's really nice about My Dear is that, we do get to connect directly with families and customers who are using My Dear. And I think, like, for me, even though at this point, like, we've been able to work with tens of thousands of families at this point, like, we have this steady stream of stories of families whose lives are for the better because they've been able to add My Dear to it. And every time I hear one of those stories, I don't know, it still makes me excited. I think, how can it not, right? Like, there's so much need out there, and being able to be part of one family's life it just feels really good.
I see the same thing. I can like look at all the numbers in the world and they'll read an email and then it's like, okay, if this person is benefiting, we're good. Um so as a professional and a father, are there any moments from your own childhood that kind of inspired this?
I would say for me, yes. So the core of My Dear, the core of learning inside of My Dear is video games, right? And I was born in the 80s. I spent a lot of time in Super Mario Brothers. And I think, like, it feels silly to say, but like that stubbornness that I picked up towards video games is like kind of like built right into My Dear, right? Like this idea of man, this thing's hard, but I will learn it. I one way or another, I am going to learn how to like play this game, to beat this game, to get to the end. And that learning, that drive, and that like realization that like video games can be a both a powerful motivator and a powerful teacher. Um, yeah, it's just I became part of the core of what my dear is.
That's amazing. So, do you play Super Mario with your kids now?
We do play. The older of the two is far more of a gamer than the younger, but I would say, yeah, I mean, we play when we can. So, like, still enjoy a lot of multiplayer games, still have that Nintendo Switch going. And when he will let me play with him, I will play with him.
Oh, that's great. My two girls are super into Mario Smash right now,
Oh, nice.
and they won't let me play anybody but Donkey Kong because they'll just point me to what to slam the ground on. It's really fun.
That sounds awesome.
It's great. And it's so funny to think about games and mental health going kind of hand in hand, but I really see a difference with my kids like before and after. One of them really gets her kind of chance to be awesome at something. The other one gets a chance to kind of exert her control needs. Do you have similar?
I think that's true for all kids, right? Like, I mean, like, this is like you think about being a kid, right? And like your parents or the people around you or your school or whoever, all these adults get all this control over your life all the time, right? And when you are in that game world, it is built so that you're the one in control. You get to decide what's happening, you get to decide what to do. And that feeling is really powerful. And yeah, it can be a really good thing.
I think so too. And I kind of see them even like when to turn it off. I feel like if they get to have a little say in when they're going to turn it off, then that full need is kind of met all the way through. But if I yank it out from under them,
Yeah, I was like going to ask. Like, I know that's something that a lot of parents struggle with. Like,
yes,
how do you guys? So that's how you guys sort of try to let the kids manage it themselves.
a little bit. Yeah. Well, we kind of do these. If you're winning, you get two more. If you're losing, let's take a break because
Before it escalates. Yeah.
yes,
No, I mean, we definitely see the escalation thing too. I mean, I do think that, like, for us, we've had a lot of luck. I mean, two things, right? Like, being involved in the gaming means that you understand the terms of the game,
yes.
which makes it far easier to be like, because if you just come in and around as Smash Brothers and you're like, you're done. Like, right? Like, it's like, wait, but that's not how the game works.
Yeah, and that's when they're getting so much aggression out too. I don't want to get in the middle of all that, you know?
Yeah. Whereas, yeah, like if you know the rules, you could be like, okay, like one more round, two more rounds, like, and kind of set like all right, this works for the schedule of our family, but we're not going to try to like pull it away from you.
Yeah, totally. So you coach soccer and you try to spend as much time with your kids as possible.
Yes.
What else do you guys like to do?
Well, we live in the Northeast. Winter's coming. It sounded very Game of Thrones, but winter is coming.
Winter is coming. We
Yes,
should talk.
we show a lot of skiing through the winter. Pretty much, yeah. What my family does pretty much every single weekend through the entire winter is we'll drive up to Vermont and ski.
Phenomenal. I'm so jealous. We will go outside and play tennis because winter here is tennis weather.
Tennis is lovely.
So speaking of winter is coming, as we go into 2025, new health policy, a lot of like nervousness in the kids right now. What do you see are the biggest mental health needs going into 2025?
I do think I mean, there are a lot of ways you can like think about that question, right? So, from the perspective of kids, which I generally think about, like there are a group of kids who just don't know what the future is going to bring in 2025 and they're trying to work through that. I know that's not universal for all kids, but I do think that like for those group of kids, like there's a lot of need to be open and share about like, what you may or may not be worried about and what people can do for their communities is I don't know. It's very like I think like that like very beginning, very basic part is important. I think that other than that, like I mean, our mental health need is not going to change or go away. Like I mean, we are still people. We still have mental health needs. It is still going to be as big as ever. And right now we don't have the resources to do it. And, for better or worse, like that's probably not going to change that much as we look forward to 2025.
Yeah, I think there's an increased awareness on neurodivergence in particular. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple ways to think about it. I think that the first piece that I think about here is that within the context of neurodivergence, we do like I mean, we see different developmental pathways for kids. So, you think about a kid with ADHD or a kid with autism. I know those kids they're developing differently, right? It's not good or bad. It's just different. And then for me, especially, I'd like to think about hey, what supports can we put in place around a kid who might be developing differently such that they can be successful? Because I think that vast majority of the time these kids can succeed on their terms. And it's really exciting to see these kids succeed on their terms. And it's just their supports might look different. So we just have to be you have to put a little bit of extra thoughts into what supports might go around them.
I would love to hear more about that.
So the thoughts on what supports, right? I mean, I would feel weird in the mental health context to say that one of those supports may or may not be meds, right? I mean, I meet a lot of parents who are very nervous about meds. I do feel obligated, whenever I'm in a setting like this, to just remind people that for a certain group of kids, meds can be a wonderful set of supports. They're not for everyone. They're not always going to be the right support for you or your kid, but they can be a great support. Um, I think other than that, there's a lot of just extra structure and a lot of extra tools that we can use to put around kids. I think for me, especially in the work we do at Migher, we think a lot about a skill called emotional regulation as a one of those places where there's a lot of need for other support. There are, putting structure throughout the day, trying to find extra. I mean, honestly, for my kids, extra time to eat has been a wonderful support.
Yes,
They're just they're just things we can do around kids that's very helpful.
totally. I find with my youngest, we suspect some neurodivergence there. It kind of runs in the family, and for her, just a morning start is completely different if it just starts with like hugs and cuddles, and then she'll get out of bed and go. But if I come in and I'm like, all right, time to wake up, time to get ready, it is going to be such a drag. But
Yeah, and knowing those supports and then knowing how to bring the other group of adults in your kid's life along with them, right? I think that's the other piece for me. Like your especially school, right? I mean, everybody around your kid wants them to succeed, right? They might not act like it, they might not show it, but their life is much better when your kid succeeds. And so trying to be as explicit as you can be about everything you know about your kid and what helps them be at their best usually has really good outcomes.
I love just the note about a little bit more time around eating because I think the scheduling often gets in the way of like what feels natural as a parent.
It can. Yeah, I mean, I have never met a parent who doesn't feel like their life is overprogrammed.
Right.
And, and so then you start building your life around how can I how can I over engineer this situation so that there are snacks placed in the car and snacks placed in every backpack and bag that I possibly own. And yes, snacks. Maybe a little over insight into our life, but yes, snacks everywhere.
Everywhere. There's popcorn all over my car right now. Um, so as you've parented your two kids and you've learned everything you have working on My Dear, what are a couple of parenting tips you've picked up?
I think the big one for me, and I think this is I mean, again, another piece that is so built into what my dear is to trust my kids.
Mm,
I will fully say that I am, as much as I will intellectually sign up for trust my kids, trust my kids, trust my kids, don't always, not always perfect.
right.
Um, but I do think there's this element of they know what's going on with them, they know what's going on with their bodies, they know what's going on. If you can stop and take a breath, which again, not perfect at, like, by any stretch of the imagination. Like, there is a high probability that, like, we can figure out, like, especially in a moment of challenge, like, what's going on, what we need. And then the other one I think that we've been thinking about a lot recently is, like, the older one went into middle school this year, a big transition, right? And just how to make sure that through whatever, like, ups and downs and, like, wherever feedback is needed and, like, whatever, like, just always making sure that, like, he knows that we have his back, no matter what's going on. And, like, just like, I mean, they're walking into a bigger world constantly, right? And, like, this is, like, just part of childhood, right? There's always, like, the world is always going to slowly unfolding, getting a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. And knowing that they have that safe spot, knowing they have that place they can trust, and trying to be very mindful of that, especially, like, recently. Just because, like, it's a lot. It's like being a kid is a lot.
Yeah. And you've got one of each, a girl and
Yes.
a boy.
Hmm.
Is it different?
Oh, they're very different. um, almost in, like, cliched ways, right? Like, boy, very much into sports and the drama of sports and make the team, not make the team. Can I do this? Can this person do this? Uh, Competitive about everything. Um, and girl is far more social. Likes to be the life of the party, likes to entertain everyone, and really trying to support her. And then trying to, like, remind myself, like, even though, like, she can be bubbly and happy, like, just again, like, she still needs to be checked in with. It's like there's still a lot going on in her life.
I find that with my oldest, her EQ is crazy. And then all of a sudden, she will just kind of be done. Like she's given everything she can socially. Her extrovert stuff has just kind of run out, and then she's spent.
Right. I mean, I don't know if this is true for your oldest, but, like, I was reminded, like, this was last week, right? My daughter was sick. We stayed home. We watched Air Bud. You don't think of Air Bud as the most emotional movie ever.
Right.
She could not hold it together when the dog was lost from his owner. And it's just sort of like it's like you're watching her, like, you feel everything
Yes.
very, very deeply. And, like, not forgetting that, like, there's that side of, like, being, like, so connected that really, like, I mean, it needs to be supported just as much as everything.
Yeah, definitely. It's these like extrovert girls, these social girls are such a funny thing to observe because they just and like it just ends at some point and then it's very emotional. Um so I guess on that subject, tell me a little bit why about emotional regulation is such an important piece for parents.
Yeah. I mean, this really started. So I started after I finished grad school, I started working at Boston Children's Hospital in the Department of Psychiatry. And myself and some of the doctors I was working with, there was, like, a very clear pattern to everybody who was coming into the hospital, right? So outpatient psychiatry, um, but kid had ADHD, if a kid had anxiety, even, like, some of the autism symptoms that were being seen in the clinic, there was always this component of emotional regulation that was part of the need. And we realized, like, as a group, that if we could support this emotional regulation, that we could do a lot of good for these kids, and help move them through and help move them closer to being able to support themselves a little bit more. Um, I think we parents generally know what emotional regulation is. I mean, it's worth, like, talking through though, right? Like, we all, like, I mean, it's kind of like what we just talk about, right? Like, we all, like, we have emotional ups and downs throughout the day. All of us do. Like, it's very, very normal. And being able to, when we have those big emotions, right, being able to still do our best or stay present or, I mean, stay within that situation is really important, right? What that looks like is not getting angry or yelling or screaming or outwardly frustrated. But it also means it's, like, not withdrawing, not becoming like, if being able to stay present in the situation. it turns out like everybody builds that skill through childhood, right? Like everybody builds that skill through childhood, but some kids need extra support. They're the type of kids who generally, um, it's those kids with ADHD, it's those kids with anxiety. Um, and so for me and the group of colleagues I was working with, like it became really important to try to figure out how we could build those skills because we knew like it really was an unmet need. Um, and being able to help was important.
That's incredible. And I think also so relevant to some of the conversations I'm hearing right now about raising boys. So, friends in publishing and friends kind of in the field around boyhood, masculinity, and that kind of feeling like we kind of overcorrected on the emotional suppression. And now we're kind of reaping what we sowed. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I do think that it is for better or worse, it's actually one of the things my wife and I talk a lot about right now. It is a hard time to. I don't know if I'm not sure I'm comfortable like with it does feel hard for boys right now, especially like in that late elementary age when you are like the academic structure comes on pretty fast, right? Like I think one of the things that we forget is that in the expectation academically, like we expect kids to read now in like kindergarten, first grade. That is new. Like not new like the past 10 years, but that's new for us. Like, right? Like kindergarten used to be far more play based. First grade even still was like starting that transition. And like that element and like that structure of like, hey, I'm gonna learn how to be social. I'm gonna learn how to interact. I'm gonna learn how to use my emotions. I'm gonna learn how to have friends. I'm gonna learn how to work out my differences. Like those are still important skills that we may not be prioritizing as much as we used to. Recesses get shorter, time on academic times gets longer. Like, and it does it.
Lunch is shorter.
Yep, and it does feel like, especially like boys at that age, like they need that time, they need those skills, and that is not what we are prioritizing as a group right now. We are, I mean, for good reason, we're trying to close achievement gaps, and that has led to different choices on how we spend our time at school.
Hmm. What's kind of like your best advice for like boy parents right now? Just
uh,
fix it, Jason.
yeah, wish I could. I mean, yeah, it's what I mean. It's funny, right? Like, I mean, like you're saying, like this is like with the group you're talking to. This is a group. This is like playground topics
Yes.
for us. Like, I mean, you hang out with the parents at school, it's drop off, whatever. Like, this is what everybody's talking about. Um, Sports can help. Like, I mean, like that is something that a lot of people go to. Extra structure can help. So that's where like something like Migher comes in. Um, I think being willing to work with the school on their terms can help. Like I often like, it's like we often will encourage parents to like look at a 504 plan, even if they feel like, hey, like, why would I do that for my kid? It's like, no, this is extra resources the school is going to give you. Um, if you can help, if you can work through this process that, might give your kid a little bit more space so they can be successful. I mean, the other piece of this is that like, as much as I personally may not like all of the priorities, and like it's actually, I mean, it's tricky, right? Like, I mean, I do think that the work on like achievement gap is super important. Like, I do think that like, I mean, kids grow up too. So like that, like, I think this is actually the hardest one of like, where can you find patience as a parent to
Yeah.
like, all right, like, I'm going to support my kid. I'm going to do everything for them. And I'm also going to like have this vision of like, yes, like I do think things are going to get better. Just like time is going to help.
Definitely. And like speaking of playground topics, it's very different for girl parents right now, right? We were talking about helping girls find kind of their voice a little bit more these days.
Yeah, I mean, like I do think that is something that is, I mean, near and dear to my heart, and like how we can help girls understand that like they have to speak up for themselves. Like this is something that, again, like makes me sad, but like I don't think it's possible to take everything, all the rights that were taken for granted in the past, like are as easy to take for granted now. And so for girls, like, yeah, making sure they know who they are, that they're comfortable with who they are, that they can advocate for who they are and who they want to be. Like, I think that's something that adults have to do.
Yeah, I, I agree 100%. So I'm seeing a lot of kids in healthy gamer world. We see the most kind of struggle around parents trying to deal with a lot of anger and defiance and these like kind of almost rage kinds of moods. What are you seeing?
I think this is a very common, like, mightier topic. I think the first thing, like, I talk to a parent about is how important it is to get an early start on helping with these kinds of behaviors. I think they can be self reinforcing in a negative way. As much as time can help, like we do want to help kids as soon as we possibly can. And so therefore, like pushing towards early intervention, even sometimes working in a preventative space is really helpful with a group of kids. Um, I think anger, aggression, those sort of like very externalized feelings, like they're almost always rooted in some sort of emotional regulation need. So this inability, like once you start having those feelings, like I think that is how your brain is built. Like it is supposed to shut off. Like your brain, once these emotions start coming up, your brain actually is supposed to shut off the cognitive part of it so that it's fight versus flight. Like you're supposed to fight the tiger or run away from the tiger. You're
Mhm.
not supposed to think very hard. Um, and so like for those parents, like the education, and this is actually a little counterintuitive, right? The education actually happens not when the kid is angry, not when the kid is raging, not when the kid is aggressive, but when they are calm, because that's when their whole brain is working. That's when they can think about this, and that's when they can build capacity for really that ability to not let that anger overtake them, to not let that frustration overtake them. And that, not that the emotions are bad. Everybody gets angry, everybody gets frustrated. It's what you're doing with those emotions that's really challenging for people around you.
My husband went through HALT with my oldest because she, I think, is most prone to this stuff. Um, which again is just so interesting because my youngest is kind of the more neurodivergent one, and my oldest is the more like prone to anger one. So it's interesting that the younger one is like really resilient. I think she's kind of almost used to people getting a little frustrated. Um, and my oldest just isn't. But anyway, he went through HALT with her, and that really helped her.
It's great to hear. Yeah. I mean, building skills is powerful. I mean, this is what we do at My Dear, right? It's like you build these skills and the things that were frustrating for you, it's not like you've turned off, right? It's not like all of a sudden, like, you're floating through life like some sort of, magical, I don't know, Jedi monk that can just take everything and you're flat. But it is more along the idea of you can like take those feelings and work with those feelings and understand that you don't have to let those feelings define your behaviors is, I don't know, like, I mean, when kids get it, like, they get it, and it's great.
Right. So, what other emotions do you see parents struggling with these days?
It's a good question. I mean, we are anxiety is a big one, right? We see a lot of kids trying to manage anxiety. And then, like, that line between depression is also, like, a really like, I actually notice this more, like, coming out of pandemic. And I think we've actually, I mean, it's never going to go away, but that feeling of sadness is also really has been one that we've seen a lot of. Um, Over at Migher, we do tend to see more of the externalizing kids. So those kids with anger, with aggression, um, irritability, which is sometimes like that line between like anxiety or sadness and then acting out is something that we also see a lot of.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of like what would a parent see when we say early intervention? Are we talking about a 4-year-old that might be hitting more than you think is normal, or is this what does that look
What
like?
does that look like? That's a great question. So for us, like, yeah, I mean, it's when you start to see a kid who maybe looks just a little bit different than the kids around them. So if you're a parent and you're like, yeah, my kid's taking a little bit longer to calm down than the other kids around them, or maybe other side of that, they're a little quicker to get angry or frustrated. And yeah, I do think that 4, 5, 6 is really like when you start to see that. I would actually say like that 5 to 6 year old range is really when, at least like in my conversations, when people really start to notice that. And then, I think that at that point, jumping into, if you are lucky enough to have like a full resourced like set of tools and like your pediatrician can throw like a social worker at you, like awesome. Um, but really trying to find out like, hey, like what can I do? And like also being proactive as a parent, like, hey, does my kid need extra activity? Does my kid need, you know, food? Back to like where we started this conversation.
Right, snacks.
Yeah, the but also like I mean, a tool like My Dear can show up at that point too. I think that it's really like at that point, like you really want a kid to start to feel confident with their emotions, right? Because I think like the flip side of this, and this is where the negative side can come in, is that if a kid ends up like that, the pattern of aggression, a pattern of anger, then what happens is they can become socially isolated. Again, this is not like not every kid. This doesn't happen to every kid. Like this isn't like, hey, like panic. Like definitely trying not to say that, but like the can become socially isolated. You can also like, if you're getting pulled out of a classroom, like that's a pretty big warning sign, right? Because you don't want to spend, again, back to that other conversation of being pulled out of the classroom means you're going to become academically behind, which honestly, like if you're having a hard time regulating, is just going to start the loop's going to start feeding on itself.
Right.
And so you're going to have to spend time trying to catch up academically, which is then going to make it harder to do childhood like things.
Right.
You're going to end up more socially isolated. Like the, it can start to spiral. And like, I think like that's the piece. Like when I think of early intervention, it's sort of like, how can we make sure things do not spiral? Um,
That's a really good kind of you kind of never know as a parent, right? Because advices are always being tossed out at you, but it makes so much sense. Like 5, 6, if you're seeing something that really looks a little bit different than what the other kids are doing or what's normal, and you're getting calls from the school, that's when you would say, all right, it's time to do something.
and I do think like a parent's intuition is usually pretty good, right? Like, I mean, you're watching your kid, you're usually watching other kids. And like, I mean, no two kids are exactly the same. Like, you should not, like, nobody should be on the lookout for a normal kid, right? But like, oh, this feels off. This feels a little different. Like, it feels like other kids are able to, I mean, it's the world that I live in. Kids are less quick to anger. Kids are, you know, they calm down quicker. Like those are signs that a parent can pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of great clinicians I know that really start out wanting to work with children end up leaving because the parents are so difficult to work with. And in my experience, even at HealthyGamer, the customer support needs are 37 times higher for a parent client than a regular client. And I'm just wondering, how can we help parents be better at working with their care team, with their kids' care team.
I think, I mean, this is like back to like one of like the core idea of like how do we help a kid see, or help a parent rather, how do we help a parent see through a kid's eyes? How do we open up that opportunity to like really like understand what's easy, what's hard? Like,
Right.
and so I mean, they're not going to be the answers for everybody, but like at My Dear, like we do things like we will send families these things called skill packs, right? So the skill pack is this idea of, hey, like play a game about emotions with your kids. Like a skill pack's actually like a physical game.
Yeah. I loved the anger one,
Eh,
by the way.
Thank you. Um, it's like, how do you like, how do you like walk into that world? How do you play with your kid? Like, how do you, but like let your kid express their emotion? Because I think that's the piece. Like for parents, you're worried about your kid, right? So that's gonna, but you also like, and pretty much all adults I know forget this. Our brains change so much. So when you're a grown up and you're watching a kid, right? You're looking at your kid, your brains do not work the same way. Whatever your child is thinking or doing or whatever, like your thought process, whatever you remember from your childhood, like all of your adult brain is like framing that memory.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, you're worried about your child. You sort of think, like, okay, like, this is like the logical, what I expect, your definition of logical or how things fit or fall for your child. Like, no, like not your head, not your kid. And so like that, yeah, those that gameplay, that really that deep interaction about how your kid is working, like, I mean, honestly, sometimes it sounds really funny, but it's like that joy of being a kid, and like it is a good, these cases not all joy, but like that, I really am gonna call it wonder, right? Because like you don't know how these things work, you're trying to put it together all for yourself, and like it is different. It is very different than how an adult brain is seeing the
It really
situation.
is. I think just an example of that is my kids, for some reason, the gravel in the parking lot is always the most exciting part of any hike. So we will travel all over the place and we're like, let's get to the hike. And they just want to play with the parking lot gravel. And it doesn't matter what country we're in, what state we're in. It's
Yeah, no, I mean, what a kid is going to be drawn to, or what a
yeah.
kid, um, back when I was in grad school, there was always this fun example, which as kids have to be younger to do this, so it wouldn't work with our kids. But like, you would ask, if you ask a parent, like, hey, like, if you ask a kid, hey, what's the shape of the earth? I'll say round because they've all heard it's round. You ask a kid to draw the shape of the earth, then you all of a sudden like get transported into this world of like, hey, wait a minute, this kid, when this kid said round, they didn't know what they meant. Because they're like trying to like, or like every adult in my world says the earth is round. Um, but if I go look outside, I don't see any round earth. And it's like,
Right.
and like that's what we like, that experience, like when we do skill packs, is like what we're trying to get at, is like this idea that dive into that world, dive into this like, hey, like i I don't talk to my kid about anger. I don't know what anger means to them. If I, and I have to play, right? Like I can't just say like, hey, what does anger mean to you? Because they don't have the words.
We have to use the word cranky.
Yeah,
Like nothing else like really resonates. And I think it's because some character was super cranky.
yeah. But I do think like if you're a kid, it's a word and it's a feeling and it's a, the reaction of the grown-ups around you when you're angry. Like it's everything. It's not just like a, and like when we're grown-ups, we're like, hey, like anger, like just get that. And it's like, no, it's the feeling of your face being hot and the feeling of your heart pounding and the feeling of all the adults are really mad at me right now, and I don't really know why, because all I want to do is play a video game. And like all of these things adding together.
Yes. You guys use biofeedback, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about why that's important.
I think it's back to this idea of what biofeedback lets kids do is see their emotions. And that's where, I mean, I do think like that idea of being able to see what is otherwise invisible is part of what makes My Dear powerful for kids. So idea of My Dear is learn emotional regulation through playing video games. And what these video games do is very naturally, they have challenges, moments of challenge in that video game. And those are hard, those are frustrating. Just like anything else in your life can be hard or frustrating, your body reacts the same exact way. Pretty predictably, your heart rate beats faster. Other things happen. Your pupils dilate, your temperature rises, like all these things happen. But biofeedback, we see the heart beating faster. And then we do something really kind of backwards and funny, but works really, really well, is we make games harder when kids get frustrated at the games. So now all of a sudden, we talk about loops and feedback loops, but hey, my body, my emotions are now a controller for a video game. Um, and if I can calm myself down when I'm frustrated, this video game that I'm playing will be easier for me to to win, to do whatever I want to do. Um, and fun thing about video games, these moments of frustration are going to happen dozens of times in a single session, hundreds of times across like an entire play of Migher. And hey, you practice anything hundreds or thousands of times, you get better at it. And that's what happens with Migher. So we actually have like really cool data. We did randomized control trials at Boston Children's. We've been able to see that kids' symptoms of anger, aggression all go down when they play Migher. We've also been able to see through some of the later work we've done that kids really like figure this out for themselves. So in the beginning, kids use tools in Migher that really help them like learn how to calm down. Like we'll teach you how to deep breathe, we'll teach you how to do progressive muscle relaxation. The kids who have the most success we call them scaffolds. They start dropping scaffolds. So they're able to feel that change all by themselves. They're able to then um, find a strategy that works for them, usually something that they've started doing by themselves, and they do it by themselves. They do it without pressing the button. They do it without looking for help to deep breathe. It's great. It's like life, right? Like, I mean, it's like if I'm in the middle of an argument, I usually don't get time to go like, hey, kruti, let me go walk outside. Let me go catch my breath. It's like, no, I really do. If I want to be my best, I kind of have to figure out a way through it while I'm here. So
I catch myself doing these deep breaths between meetings, actually. And of course, Alok is a big proponent of meditation and things like that. And that's been very big for us and kind of the skills that we build with the kids. But it's really cool to use like the actual heart rate and visualize it for the kid.
yeah, I mean, it leads to a kind of mindfulness, right? Because
Yeah.
you get to know what your body feels like, and you get to become aware of your body, what your body feels like. And video games are generally pretty safe. Like you're not like the
Yeah.
stakes are not as high as being at school. The stakes are not as high as an argument with your parents. Like it is, can't land a jump. Like, I mean, they can be very frustrating. Like, if we've all met, like,
Yeah.
your own kids, like, it can be very frustrating,
Yeah.
but like, it is still a safer space. And there's always that reset button is always there. So,
Definitely switching gears maybe a little bit. ADHD is a big topic right now. A lot of emotional, there's the like learning and achievement part, but a lot of it is the social, the everyday challenges, the physicality, and like just how physically and emotionally demanding it is. So, what would you advise as a plan of attack? You've mentioned 504 plans, you've mentioned support structures. If you're a parent and you want an early intervention around ADHD, what do you recommend?
uh, great question. If you are worried at all, I mean, I think the first stop has to be your pediatrician. I really, like, I firmly believe, like, hey, like, we need to get that level of support involved. You can start tracking the kid. They can point you at resources that may be available within your community. I do think that in some ways, unfortunately, like, yes, there usually are wait lists for services. And that is something that, like, for all the idealism of go start with a pediatrician, like, we do have to acknowledge that, like, that is the right place to start. And the follow up might not feel super satisfying.
Yeah, there might need to be a parallel process,
Um,
maybe.
I think other than that, like, I mean, we did talk about the schools as well. So making sure, like, there are these institutions, and I think it is a, this is like where the mindfulness is apparent because it very quickly starts to feel like the world against your kid.
Yes.
Um, you definitely have to restrain that for better or worse. Like, because like the school, especially, they are very heavily incentivized for your kid to be, I mean, maybe like success on your terms, maybe not as much, but like at least like able to get through the day without chewing up a bunch of the superintendent, blah, 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 the teacher's time, the principal's time, like the, like let's make it to the superintendent. There might be bigger problems, but
Yes, if
uh,
only we could get to that level right off the bat.
yeah, but the element of like, hey, like I do think like you have to make sure that you're like always being like, okay, like, hey, like these people around my kid want them to succeed. Like how I think then going as a parent and like then like there are places like you're still not going to feel super in control, right? Like you're doing the right things, but you're not going to feel super in control. Resources like what you guys are building, like honestly, like hey, like there's a group over a Healthy Gamer, like there's going to be parents that look like me, like understanding you're not alone is like so powerful.
I find the parent community, even personally, just to kind of have a space because, all right, so in normal parent life, right, if your kid is the one that's having the meltdown, that group of parents isn't necessarily the kind of parents you want to talk about this with, right? But if you can go online or go to a supportive community of parents, I find it to be very cathartic.
I can't get over how many parents have stories about their kids that, I mean, I do have a little bit of privilege, right? Like, I mean, everybody, like in my community, people know that I run Migher and like I'm very happy to talk about their kid and their needs and the support that are available. But like, they're like, hey, your kid's fine, right? Like, no, nobody. It's like,
Yeah.
it's never this case that like there's like some kid out there who's got it all together, all. And so I do think like there is this element of wherever you're comfortable, right? If it's within your, if it's at the playground being like, hey, what's going on, if it's in a community like Healthy Game, like just having that space to understand that like all of us are working on this, and everybody's got stuff that's worked, everybody's got stuff that doesn't work, and until you start really diving in, like I mean, there is going to be a little difference kid to kid, so like just you know being curious and being part of that community is like where you're going to find the, you find with the tools that may or may not work for you.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of part of it is like not everything works, right?
I mean, I started meds a long time ago. Meds don't work for everyone.
Right.
Therapy, I mean, therapists are awesome, right? Because they can keep trying different things. Like that's what the skill of a therapist is they have giant toolboxes, but not everything in their toolbox works. And like these are people who go to school a lot. So if you're a parent, like curiosity is your friend. Like my dear works a lot of the time, but a lot of the time is like in mental health is like 60 to 70% of the time. Like
Yeah.
that's not like it is not a, we call it responder rates, like as the technical term, but responder rates are not always great in like for mental health interventions. And so you have to be willing to try a lot of things.
I've heard you talk about this in the past around emotional regulation in particular, where if that's the goal, a therapist's office is kind of not the best place to have that practice.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it like riding a bike, right? So a you think about a 6-year-old child and you think about what their tools and skill sets are. They're very exploratory, right? So you want a kid to ride a bike. Most of us have the experience of teaching a kid how to ride a bike. You get them out on that bike and you get them, build a sense of balance. What you don't do is you don't get a book about bikes and start reading to them about how to ride a bike, right? Like that's not usually the best approach. A therapist's toolkit is generally more cognitive facing. And so, I mean, again, this is not, there are there are behavioral tools, don't get me wrong, but like those cognitive tools are really asking a kid to have a understanding of what it will feel like and what strategies they're going to use when they're in the midst of some sort of frustration that is leading to a rage or an aggressive moment or an outburst or whatever. But then you get into the problem of like, hey, but the cognitive part of the brain turned off during that moment. And so, as a therapist, like what your tools are is really to try to help a kid understand like what situations are like this, how can I avoid these situations. You can give a kid tools to calm down, but I mean, again, at that point, the point they're using them, it's too late. Um, where I do think that tools like Mightier are different, are that the idea is learn how to respond to your body when these feelings are coming. So it is more like that bike of like, hey, how do I practice when I am frustrated? What skills can I use? And not necessarily put words to it because words are hard for kids. But have enough practice that it becomes a muscle memory. It becomes ready to go, so that you can calm yourself down. Um, and I do. I mean, it again. I being careful to say it doesn't work for everyone. I do think like one of the powerful data points out of our trials is that we see less family stress. We actually did like a weird, cool thing. Like parents are able to go to work more, which I mean, I realize is not the be all and end all for everyone, but again, because the kid is able to, kid succeeds in their life, you succeed in your life. And
Right.
like being able to put those two things together, I mean, shows that like, hey, you build these skills. It's not just the kid benefits, but we see it spiral outward in a good way. So now we've got a good spiral.
Yes.
Spiral.
Yes, definitely. It takes work to kind of build that momentum, right? In any one thing, you have to like slam on the brakes and then you're like, okay, got to handle it. And then you have to work to build that momentum again. So, really, anything you can do to not have to slam on the brakes. Um, Absolutely. And I agree. It's not the end all be all, but it's reality that,
Right.
yeah,
Well, and I mean, it's like, I mean, we were able to do it because like, it's a good proxy for like, hey, like everybody, every grown up, every parent has like a definition of what they want their life to look like. And
exactly.
it may be work, it may not be work, but if you're bringing that momentum to then go provide support for your kid, like, yes, I mean, that's what we're going to do. We're parents. Like, that is what we're going to do. But it then interrupts you and you're not able to I mean, and so putting your kid on the right track really is like a form of self-care it's important.
Absolutely. I I think that's exactly right. Where like as a parent for your own self-care, you've got to be able to control the variables a little bit. We're through kind of this first section. We can go into the Reddit reacts. This is like the playground topics around toxic masculinity and video games.
Masculinity one was actually kind of hard for me to like. I was like curious, like I was actually super curious how you wanted to talk about the toxic masculinity stuff because I was like a little bit of just like, oh dear Lord, what am I up against when my kid become like my sixth grader watches Fortnite videos. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like this is not like it's not my life yet, but it will be.
Yeah. The way we do it is it's kind of like age appropriate, right? Like one of my kids, I think, can almost academically understand that a lot of people are really upset right now. They haven't felt heard. And now that they are being heard, this is how they're reacting. Like in the same way that if you didn't get what you wanted for a long time and you finally got what you wanted, how would you act? Would you just be like, oh, great, I got it? Or would you be like, I got it and like make a big deal out of it? So I think she can kind of understand big picture that some of this talk is like an overreaction. My youngest is a fighter. So she will just go into a situation where she won't stand up for herself, but she'll stand up for her friends, right? And so I almost have to be like, listen, you're about to hear some stuff that's going to make you really angry and talk to her more about that.
Well, like that childhood, because like I'm sure like a ton of people have kids that are like because like kids have like such a wild version of justice, right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
I know, like, I mean, this is not something that I have any answers for. So I'm like actually like super like, where do you go with it, right? Because it's like in both directions, right? So like the way your daughter's dealing with it is honestly like super admirable, right? Of like, I am gonna like fight, I'm gonna stand up for the people around me. Amazing, right? But
But you can't
you
fight
right,
everybody at the
that
playground, right?
you can
Finding the right fight, I think, is a really hard part of it.
yeah, right.
And it's not like the adults have figured this out
No, and
either.
no, but I mean, like, and I think like the other side of it is because, like, I mean, I can see it in my own kids, like, right, of like I mean, it's usually again, it's more individual for my kids, but it's like, okay, but like, do you really like? I don't have any, like, so I'm curious, like, do you really need to solve this ill right now? Like, okay, like, this person got something you didn't, but like, why? Like, let's step back, like, right, like, is it impacting you? Did they get it because they need it? Like, I mean, like, you walk through like all the various like like, I mean, you sort of like walk through like the equity equality thing a little bit, but it's like, it's still like, I mean, again, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's asking a kid to understand that is a tall order.
It is. Well, I think it's hard for some adults to understand this, right? Where every problem in the world is their problem. They feel the weight constantly. And there's a lot of commentary around how it's just crushing kids to like constantly hear about climate change and this war here, that war there. And obviously they should know what's going on, but it's a hard line for like, it really does impact them.
I don't like, I mean, I wish I knew how you grew up under those circumstances, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, and like, I don't know. Like, I mean, maybe, I mean, I think about my own kids and maybe they're like, maybe they are, we got to give them some credit for like their ability to like engage with like multiple parts of the puzzle, right? Like, I mean, all right, yes, I'm hearing about wars, I'm hearing about climate change, and I'm going to go to gymnastics now. And
And I'm going to gymnastics now. Yeah, I think it really much is like a, okay, here's your real life. And one of a relative of mine, she just has, I think, like such an upstanding, like 16-year-old kid, and he is a band kid. And his whole thing is like, this is my tribe, this is my community. We volunteer together. We do all these like amazing things. And like, this is my world. I don't have to bear the ills of the whole world.
I do think like that is like I mean, I very much like a life feeling that I have, like, of like, you have a community, right? Like, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, no matter how you feel about current events, like, you have a community and like, it's still your job to show up and like make that community better. Like, kind of no matter what. And like, I don't know, like again, from a kid perspective, I don't know if my own kids hear me on this point
Yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah. What is the right age to start playing video games, in your professional opinion?
First, I actually don't know, like academically, like if people have done this research, like maybe, maybe not. I have been impressed. Um, Maybe speaking more as a parent than a professional, how if you're willing to sit with your kid through games, there is usually a developmentally appropriate lesson that they're going to take away from a game. Um, I remember like 4 year old, like playing with my 3 or 4 year old, my son when he was 3 or 4 year olds, like just going through Tokaboka. Like, I mean, like in some ways, yeah, it's like playing with Legos. Like just put the world together, like see how, what are the rules of this space? Can I play? What happens? Building these little tiny physics based things. It's cool. Um, then graduating to Mario Kart and like learning about competition and learning, yeah, like I think kind of fun to see through that and see that grow up. And then now watching him learn social dynamics in online play,
Yeah.
not been super fun,
Yeah.
has been a lot of opportunities to learn.
Yeah.
for both of us.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, I do think like it's still an opportunity, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think that there are the reaction of like, man, I don't like how my kid talks to other kids, or I don't like how other kids are talking to my kid during Fortnite or whatever. Like, I've definitely had those feelings. um, but if you just for like, hey, I'm gonna yank it all the time, just remove the problem, like those problems are just gonna come back in a different form some other time. Um, it is a group problem, for better or worse. It is group problem solving, and knowing that you can't scream at your friends to solve a problem, like we have to learn that somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Um, and so I mean, I don't want to pretend that I have the answers, but like, I mean, it's that that exertion of where is my control? How do I work with a group? Like, what am, what's my role as a team member, as a leader? Like, these are all developmentally appropriate questions. They just happen in different places. And like, that's
Totally.
cool. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's frustrating. Like, I mean, it's frustrating and cool at the same time. Like,
It is very hard to be in the
yeah,
same room as
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But at the same time, you have to kind of
yeah.
know what's going on. Um, I agree. It's also if they're a really competitive kid, they've got to have an outlet, and it's not going to be perfect for the first couple of years probably, but they work through it. That's the
Yeah.
whole point, right?
I do think that like that. I'm glad that you put like the time frame of years on it, because like I don't know, like I mean, just expecting that your anyone is going to show up and like build these norms in a span of days, weeks, months is like it's a tall order. I mean, especially again, like we do have to remember that these like kids are biologically different than grown-ups, right? Like their brains are not fully built. And as much as it is not the right answer to scream at somebody because they didn't push when it was time to push or whatever was going on, like,
Top, top, top. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Like, we'd still like, yes, we have to.
Totally. Well, I've seen it happen where they like try different ways, right? Like they try yelling, they try yelling, they try yelling, it's not working. And then there's that like, okay, guys, moment where they like really have to talk about it and explain why. And so you kind of almost see them go through the whole like team leadership or team or somebody's just like, what are we doing? This isn't working. And you see them play each of these roles, and it's going to take time for them to be the questioner, be the leader, be the problem solver, be the strategist, be the guy that needs a lot of help. Sometimes,
That's the other, like, these games are designed, like, I mean, one of the things I talk about with my son a lot, who, the people on the other side of the game, like the designers, like, they know what they're doing. They generally have PhDs, right? So they're like, if somebody wins all the time, that's like they're gonna feel like they've completely mastered. So like the game is going to by design like do matchmaking such that you are going to lose, because you having that feeling is gonna motivate you to come back
you
one
want to
more
play
time.
more, right?
Because like, oh, I could have done it, but it just doesn't like, and understanding both from a play perspective and a money perspective that like you are not going to outsmart a team of economists who have access to every single transaction that has ever happened in this game. Um, and so like just be aware. Like, I mean, like, hey, like person on the other side wants to make money. That's great. It's a normal,
Right.
fine thing, right? But like this is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's that meta view,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we love the meta. Um, can you share, just switching gears a little bit into impact of emotional regulation on behavior and development? Could you share some examples or outcomes you've seen where prioritizing emotional regulation has led to a transformation in a kid's behavior?
Got a couple like specific stories floating through my head, and they're gonna like come out as an amalgamation. But like I think what we see is it's a pretty typical story, right? So anger emotional regulation, like parents usually see it most when the kid is acting out. So the kid will become angry. Kid will, thinking of a very specific kid in my head, but they, hit siblings, act out. Like, I mean, it's very, and like from the parent perspective, like it's scary, right? Like you're like, you got a kid that's like tending towards violence, tending towards like, it's not something that feels very good, to say the least. And something, when any treatment lands, like in this case, the treatment was Migher, but when any treatment lands, then all of a sudden, it's not like, again, it's like, the process, right? It's not like, hey, magic, kid's never gonna be angry again. Like, right? Like, that's not the, but like this element of you can watch the gears spinning in your kid's head, and it feels so good to be like, all right, like they feel their body changing. They are trying to like figure out like, okay, what am I going to do here? They are giving themselves that half extra second to take a breath. And then it's the thing that doesn't happen that becomes like, it's like hard to see the thing that doesn't happen when you're a grown up. Like, but like, okay, like, hey, here we are. And, the kid's brother sitting too close to them used to lead to like somebody would get hit, there would be yelling and screaming or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And instead, there was a breath and an inching away, and then a decision to go upstairs or whatever it is. Like that, avoided situation of like, this was gonna be an explosion. This was gonna be me losing my patience as a grown up. Like, because then, like, we talked about this, right? But like everybody feels bad when you like when the grown up loses their patience. The grown up feels bad, kids feel bad, the kids know something's off, like, right. Um and it is like, and it happens more and more and more. And like all of a sudden, like I think like again, we hear these stories of like the climate just gets cooler, right? So it's like instead of everybody walking around on edge, worrying about like the next time an eruption's gonna come, like there's, I mean, I guess it is. It's like an anticipatory anxiety that like
Mm-hmm.
parents have.
Yeah, you're watching
Yeah,
it and you're
right.
counting down. You're
Yes.
like, we're T minus 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
4 minutes away from this.
And if you can like take a step back from that,
Right.
like you feel better. Um, your kid is obviously feeling better because they're proud. Like kids are proud of themselves for like being able to like. I mean, they really like. I mean, kids know. Like it's impressive. The kids know. Like kids know if they're the bad. They don't want to be the bad kid, but they like feel like they're labeled as the bad kid. I've heard those stories also. Like kids who are like, "Hey, like I went to school and like I felt like I was the bad kid. I felt like I was the kid who was always getting in trouble." Um, and now I'm able to work through it. Now I'm able to like stay in the classroom. I'm not the I'm not bad kid anymore. So it's, I don't know. Like I mean, like, yeah, I'm not sure. Like that feeling and that skill of like what does it feel like from a kid to have it, like it's equally powerful.
Yeah. Just not being the one that's in trouble all the time, right? Being able to like avoid the conflict or that it's huge. I imagine it's very relieving for the parental stress as well.
Oh yeah, I mean we do see, like, we actually measure parent stress.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, like, for us, like, as much as we talk about kids and individual stories, like we are very heavily rooted in our outcomes. And one of the outcomes that's always been super important to me is this idea of parent stress, right? Because like we have interventions in the mental health field where like kids get better at these very small, very defined tasks, but it's very hard to see like what was, the so what's the next level. And we've always used parent stress as our ability to understand like, okay, have we made a large enough impact in this kid's life that the people around this kid are noticing that impact? And so we do, like we hear stories, but we also measure this quantitatively and across a population, and we see parent stress decrease.
That's amazing. And if a parent stresses up, does that mean that the kids' stress is gonna go up?
That is definitely where the field is like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that is definitely where people are feeling like it is. I mean, I've noticed it in my own life. I'm sure you have as well.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm working late, I think my whole family has kind of, like, understood, I think, that, like, she needs a few minutes before we engage, and yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like the shorter fuse isn't just for kids, right? Like, I mean, if you've had a bad day at work and like, it feels if something at home doesn't feel like it's going exactly right, like,
Right.
hey, like, but then your kids are going to react to that too. And like, again, as a parent, it's very like, you're not doing anything wrong by being stupid, right? But it's
Right.
like,
You just don't wanna model that,
yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, it's been a lot of, like, I've had a really hard day, I just wanna be in bed, and we have, like, our zones of the house of, like, this is because we pay attention so much to technology and the impacts of technology, right? So, some of our rooms aren't like, if you're gonna watch TV for fun, you're going up to the media room. If you're playing video games for fun, you're going up to the media room. If you've had a bad day and you just wanna chill out and watch TV, you're going into mom and dad's bedroom. And so if one of my kids is like, "Can we watch the baking show together?" It's like, "Oh, she's had a hard day," you know? And so we kinda just know based on what they're asking for, what's going on with them.
It's impressive to be that in tune, right? And then also, like, I think the other thing, like, I would say, like, I mean, I definitely feel it for me because, like, how you can give yourself space to be like, to react to your kid and, like, because, like, it could very well be that you've had a bad day too and, like,
Yeah.
still trying to, like, make sure you have space. It's not always easy.
It's not, and I don't know that this is, like, applicable for everyone, but if you do have the luxury of just being like, "You know what? Getting up at 6:30 tomorrow morning is just not what we need right now." Like, get the 2 hours extra sleep. You'll go to school late. I'll get a little sleep, and, like, what we need right now is just rest, and
Mhm.
it's not great. I wouldn't, like, recommend, blow off school, but I don't know, something's gotta give sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like, the more like, the applicable part of that is also, like, finding where you can give space, right?
Yeah,
Like, everybody's gonna have a different life situation, and
exactly.
I mean, but, like, at some point, like, there is something that can give where you can be like, "Okay, like, let's figure out what it is here and, like, give into
Right,
that impulse." Like, we
right.
have definitely been in that position of, like, "You know what? Like, school drop off is just not happening at 7:30 this morning, so let's not do it."
Yeah, and if we're not doing it, everybody just sleep, right? Well, okay. So segueing a little bit, a lot of parents on our platform, particularly in the Healthy Gamer families community, feel a lot of pressure around neurodivergent children. How does Migher's family care team support parents in managing the stress?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work to try to support parents pretty directly. We are I would say that, like, I mean, we talked a little bit about, like, the tools that parents get. So, like, when if you're a kid, you're getting Mightier, you're playing the games. But if you're a parent, we put you into we call a parent app. It's a companion experience to Mightier. And that experience is going to have a lot of tailored information for you as a parent and your kid, right? Because supporting a kid, even a kid who's neurodivergent, like, there's going to be needs that are different. And we're very lucky we have some amazing team of clinicians who work with us, and they've built this entire, like, wealth of knowledge and content and support. And so we're going to be doing our best to pair you up with, like, all of the right knowledge that we've ever had. Not just to support your kid in their My Dear journey, which, yes, definitely want to do that, but, like, support you as a parent, support you as a strategy. We're going to be sending your kids skill packs, like we talked about already, like this idea of, like, how do we bring emotional learning into the home? How do we make you as a parent part of that journey? We play around with other tools. Like, again, our goal is always to make emotions playful. So we played around with conversation cards where, like, a lot of it's just silly, like, just trying to get people to describe what their emotions are, or, like, how like under very silly terms. Because again, like, I don't know, like emotions aren't supposed to be like this foreign, really hard to talk about thing. It's just how we see it and how our kids see it are so different
Yeah.
that like giving a really goofy space to engage is honestly like, yeah, I find it way healthier than like waiting until things have gone wrong and then trying to fix it in the moment.
Right. 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 And that's always rough too.
Yeah,
It's harder.
it is. I mean, like, it doesn't, I don't personally think it sticks if you're trying to work just through moment to moment. Like,
Yeah.
it's like that reactionary approach is just it. But if your kid knows that you have the same challenges, that you're working through the same thing, that you're different, like that your brain works differently, like that's going to help them as just as much as it's going to help you.
Absolutely. And I think I've heard you talk about this before, but can you say a little bit about why the emotional regulation, like how it impacts kids long term?
Oh, yeah. I mean, going back, there's actually like a lot of research on where emotional regulation and how it fits into a kid's development. So, when you look at like pretty much anything you could want for a kid, um, it's kind of nicely like summarized, like so social relationships, long-term health, even like long-term income, wealth, stuff like that. Like emotional regulation is actually predictive. Um, it does make sense, right? Like if you're able to persevere, stay resilient, even when things are not going your way and you're able to push through those situations, like it does make sense that those kids end up being more successful. I think the other thing that like parents, like every single kid is learning this and can learn it, right? So it's not like you look at any one kid right now and it's their destiny, right? So like universally, like every single kid, like emotional regulation starts little babies, it's called co-regulation then. And like you're working with your mom and like it's, like you need your mom to help calm you down. And that's how humans work, right? Dad can do it too. He's not usually not as good. um, but like it's
It's a little
co-regulate.
bit of a learning
Yeah,
curve there
yeah, right.
sometimes. Yeah.
Um, Also just hierarchy of needs, like little crying baby. Sometimes mom is just better at feeding the little baby. Um, the But then, like, I do think, like, well, not think, but like through 2 years old, like the brain is starting to build these capacity, and then as you go, and it's like literally no 3-year-old is good at emotional regulation. We don't like we obviously like we don't say like, okay, well that kid's a lost cause because like we're learning, right?
Right,
So like,
right, right, right.
and so and that's really where like tools like Migher come in, and there are other tools besides Migher. Like this is again like where therapists can support and like communities like HealthyGamer can support, and like there are, but like kids are learning, and if you support that learning, they're gonna, you're giving your kid an advantage, a long-term advantage, because there is this vision. I mean, I very much try to keep it of like, hey, like, what is the best version of any single kid we've got in front of us? And how can we help that kid be the best version of themselves?
Absolutely.
It does not make sense right now that, like, if you want mental health care, you have to be able to afford it, or you have to be at a place like, I mean, we're in Houston right now, we're shooting in Houston, and there are lots, and lots of resources in Houston. I live in Boston. There are astronomical amounts of resources in Boston.
Yeah.
Um, I do know in Boston that wait times are measured in many, many, many months, despite the fact that I think we have the most child psychologists and child psychiatrists in the world. Um,
Yeah.
and so for us, a lot of our forward-looking work is like, how do we make my year more accessible? So we've been working with Medicaid plans. We've been able to find some very forward-looking partners, but I do think this is the future. Like I do, for better or worse. Like, I mean, we need to be thinking about mental health as early intervention and preventative, and having kids sit on wait lists. Like that's the other part of the Mightier origin story, right?
Right.
Yeah. Like, I mean, Boston Children's, you stare at a wait list that stretches into thousands and you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah. It's overwhelming,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right. It's like, I have something that works. I have something that scales. I can take it outside the walls of the hospital, and I can, every single one of those 1,000 kids can benefit in some way.
That's a scary leap. I remember Alok thinking through that too.
It is a scary leap. I I'm impressed at how much of the community has been willing to come along.
That's great.
I think for you guys too, I'm impressed at how much community. I mean, you guys have been better than us, honestly. Like, I mean, just building a community and really like saying like, no, this is something that the world needs to pay attention to.
It's so interesting because, when we were building Healthy Gamer, people were like, "What's the product?" And we were like, "We don't know yet," because there's not a clear problem yet. But what we do know is the problem is the wait list, and there's nothing to do in the meantime. So, is there a way to do the education, the community part, while we figure out the product part? So now we figured it out, but it's looking at insurance reimbursement and that part of the growth journey. I am not excited.
It's been a lot of hoops.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very exciting way to grow. Um, I think that in our ideal world, because we have a lot of like we have a lot of ideas in the background about how could we help kids with. My dear, very emotional regulation. Most of these kids are externalizing. Our science goes up to age 18, but like a lot of our kids are in that early childhood, middle childhood, like 6 to 14 range.
Love it.
We know that a lot of teens need support. We're sitting on a lot of ideas like how can we help these kids? But at the same time, like being able to grow, it's a different kind of growth, but like how can we 40% of the kids in this country get care through Medicaid, which is
Wow.
it's yeah. And I mean, they do have access. The kids who have access to therapists they're getting good care, but and I'm not a therapist. Like the therapists are not going to solve this
Especially
problem.
in child.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
it's
no.
rough.
Um, and so I mean, this is like the thing that we think about. Like this is what we have put on our shoulders of like, hey, how do we deal with we've got the US healthcare system, which for all its strengths and weaknesses, is our healthcare system. So how do we work within this system and figure out how we can be a part of the story for getting? I mean, it's millions of kids.
Yeah.
How can we get millions of kids access to mental health care? And this is where, like, I mean, again, emotional regulation is a good starting point because that is something that no matter who the kid is, we can differentiate the care a little bit, right? So like it looks a little bit different for ADHD or anxiety, but like we can help so many kids. And so, but we've got to figure out the system. And we're starting to. We've got a few really good forward looking plans that has been really nice.
That's really exciting to hear about. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this might be a good place to close this one, but I'm really looking forward to more conversations with you. Thank you so much. Mm.
Thanks.
All right.